Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binaries, welcome to my first video lecture on literature. My name is Marcelo, and today we'll be discussing two English classics, The Time Machine, the first work by H.G. Wells, and 1984, the bleak dystopia of George Orwell. Each was written in a different historic context. The Time Machine in 1895, during the prosperous days of Europe's Bailey epoch, but also the days of Darwinian theory and its social variant, and of the rise of the communist movement, while 1984 was written in the final years of World War II, as communism ruled one of the world's powers and dictatorships set half of the world ablaze. Furthermore, while 1984 describes a world ruled by a totalitarian communist regime, The Time Machine describes a world over 800,000 years into the future. However, in spite of these differences, these two books may have far more in common with each other than they might appear. H.G. Wells is, together with Jules Verne and Hugo Gernsback, regarded as one of the fathers of science fiction, and his very first book is a classic of the genre. In The Time Machine, through the words of the unnamed time traveler, we are introduced to the Earth of the year 802,701. By that year, he expects to find a humanity evolved into a race of ultimate intellectuals, free from all the vices and limitations of their ancestors. Just think about it. Think of everything humanity has achieved between the birth of Christ and the invention of Facebook, two things separated by mere 2,000 years. Surely 400 times this time would see advances beyond our imaginations, right? Turns out humanity in the 800,000s isn't quite what anyone might have expected. In fact, humanity as we know it doesn't even exist anymore. The first people he finds are the Eloi, child-sized, fun-loving, warm and naive humanoids, kind of like hobbits, but with less foot hair and less pipe smoking, and less ring-bearing. They wear beautiful clothes and live in great buildings, but in no moment do they show any trace of industriousness or high intellect. They live in grand palaces, but even these seem quite old, having received no repair from the Eloi. The time traveler then deduces that, ages before, humanity had reached the ultimate stage of social development, achieving a society without dangers, violence or need, where everyone could simply enjoy life without effort, and it was precisely the absence of need that drove the Eloi to lose all sense of hard work and creativity. One question remained, though. If there were such couch potatoes, how did they get new clothes and food every day? And that's when the time traveler meets the Morlocks, an underground race of humanoids who go to surface only at night. In spite of their caveman-like looks, they are actually an intelligence race that can even operate machines. It then becomes clear that the Morlocks are just another branch of the human evolution. Soon later, the time traveler realizes that it was the Morlocks who provided the Eloi with everything they needed to survive. This leads him to one final conclusion. Both races are the evolutions of his own time's social classes. The Eloi descend of the hedonistic and refined upper classes, while the Morlocks descend of the working class, turned into uncultured brutes by a labor aimed solely at sustaining the rich, and relegated to the underground of the cities and then of the earth itself. That's where Darwinian theory kicks in. According to Charles Darwin, every species is molded by the environment where it is inserted, adapting to new needs and getting rid of traits that have become obsolete. But this process can be manipulated too. Just think of how selective breeding has given birth to a variety of dog breeds with particular looks and behaviors. In the same manner, in the world of the time machine, the upper classes, after living a life of plenty that demanded little effort for hundreds of thousands of years, became the refined, beautiful, but inefficient and helpless Eloi. On the other hand, the working classes who for the same time period were exploited, made to work for the rich and raised with little if any cultural or academic formation, evolved into the brutish Morlocks. A lot happens after the time traveler descends into the Moloch caves, but, I won't spoil the ending for you. Besides, there is yet another book I'd like to talk about. Not many books have left such a powerful mark on a culture as George Orwell's 1984 has. Its story takes place in the land of Astrip I, a province of Oceania that was once known as the United Kingdom. Oceania itself is a superpower ruled by the communist dictatorship of the party, the single, all-powerful and all-knowing political entity in the country, symbolized by the figure of the Big Brother. Outside the party, comprising the vast majority of Oceania's population, that is the working class, or the proles for short, who support the country with their work, but who are left to live in very precarious conditions, both economic and cultural. This is the world where Winston Smith lives. As a member of the Outer Party, which is the middle class of Oceania, he lives in better conditions than the proles, but just like everyone else, even an elite of the inner party, he is subjected to the government's constant surveillance and control. And this control is something as insane as it is terrifying. Not only people's actions are watched through cameras installed on the telescreens, just like webcams, mind you, but also their speech through the Newspeak dialect created to prevent subversive speeches, and even their thoughts through doublethink and thought crime, two types of mindset that allow one to, respectively, accept contradicting facts without questioning and suppress one's own thoughts that might be subversive. A detailed description of all concepts in 1984 could easily make content for the whole series of videos. And as much as I would enjoy doing that, for this one I must keep to the essentials. The party was born as a follower of communist ideals, and as such it presented itself as siding with the working classes and with the country, as it still does by Winston's time. After taking over Oceania's government, however, it became the sole ruling party, controlling every aspect of society, controlling people's bodies and minds, controlling the culture, the propaganda, the communication networks, the food rationing, all for the good of people and country. Oceania is intended to be the communist state gone wrong to the 10th power, turned into a self-maintaining machine of control that is virtually impossible to break. In 1984, Winston is a man who sees through the party's deception and tries to find a way to fight back, but, oh well, here I was almost spoiling the end again. Anyway, I hope I've managed to give a sufficient overview of the plot and the main themes of both The Time Machine and 1984. Now think about what these two stories may have in common. You may or may not follow these questions. What kind of paradigm, that is, capitalism or communism, do you think the society in each book represents? What is the view that each story has of its own society? In other words, is it utopian or dystopian? What differences do you see between the themes in both stories? And finally, what similarities do you see between these same themes? Now, like the time traveler, you have the power to pause time, that is, this video, and reflect on these questions as you wish. Just remember, like the Big Brother, I'm always watching you. That sounded kinda creepy, didn't it? So, by now, you must have realized that both stories describe dystopias. This is crystal clear with 1984, whose world is a place where human beings are forbidden to think diversely or creatively, to dream, even to love. The Time Machine, however, may not be too obviously a dystopia at first sight, maybe due to a lack of the dark imagery, the violence and the environmental degradation that is so typical in this genre, like in Blade Runner, The Matrix, The Hunger Games, in Black Mirror. In Wells' story, the world of Wait, can we just say far future? Okay, thanks. So, the world of the far future is one of lush vegetation, bright days, grand buildings. Even the Eloi, as silly as they may be, live well and happily. However, beneath this apparently joyful existence, there is an unstoppable process of degradation going on, and a keen observer may notice that by how the time traveler describes the buildings he comes across. For example, this is how he describes the place where the Eloi have their meals.
And perhaps the thing that struck me the most was its dilapidated look. The stained glass windows, which displayed only a geometrical pattern, were broken in many places, and the curtains that hung across the lower end were thick with dust. And it caught my eye that the corner of the marble table near me was fractured. Nevertheless, the general effect was extremely rich and picturesque.
But the main sign of humanity's degradation is indeed the nature of both Eloi and Molochs, both children of an extremely unequal society, one of whom lost all sense of creativity and progress, while the other became vicious, cannibalistic cavemen. A stark contrast with the great society that once existed on Earth, of which the only vestiges left are the grand but decaying buildings now inhabited by the Eloi. As the ultimate proof of humanity's failure to establish a solid and permanent civilization, the time traveler leaps 30 million years into the future, only to witness a dark Earth covered in scraps of life striving to survive beneath a dying red sun. How did humanity go so wrong in the world of the time machine? Well, the time traveler's answer bears it all. It was the social inequality of a capitalist society, plus the hedonism of the elite and the low-life conditions of the working class, all fermented by good old Darwinian theory, that resulted in an ultimately stagnant world populated by two branches of the Homo sapiens, one infantilized, the other brutalized. To sum it up, this is what Wells imagined as an extreme consequence of the late 19th century capitalist society that he himself lived. Orwell is, too, quite explicit when it comes to the culprits of the degenerate society that Oceania became, which comes as no surprise given how Orwell, while a socialist, was a vocal critic of Stalinist communism and of what the Soviet Union had become. As I said before, Oceania is supposed to be a communist dictatorship on steroids. Like in the Soviet Union, a single party concentrates all the power in the nation, closely monitoring the people, the media, and even the culture after subversive elements, all while hailing itself through relentless propaganda and silencing anyone who opposes or denounces it. Of course, there are many differences between both 1984 and The Time Machine. For example, Orwell's work is way more complex, both in its analysis of society and in the description of its own world. Wells's, on the other hand, may seem simplistic by comparison, but the use it makes of the evolutionary theory is quite interesting. Consider how the earliest humans evolved into a variety of hominid species, depending on their respective environments and needs. Does it seem that implausible that social stratification, taken to extreme levels and given enough time, can result in different species similar to what happened to Eloi and Molochs? But, well, obviously this is all nothing more than hypothesizing and fiction. Being the dystopias they are, capitalist and communist respectively, both The Time Machine and 1984 are concerned with showing the darkness that humankind is capable of. Not because this is inevitably how we are all going to end, but to warn us that, hey, we don't live in a Saturday morning cartoon. The world can and will go to hell if we are not careful enough. So, everyone, let's part ways with some food for thought. What did you think of this comparison between these two classics? Do you find either of their future societies to be plausible? Why or why not? And one last, more fun question. If you had a time machine, what historic period would you wish to travel to? Or would you rather just stick to your own time? Well, I know I would pull a Barry Allen and create a flashpoint in which the Europeans never came to the Americas just to see how the pre-Columbian societies will develop, but that's just me. Thank you all for listening, and till next time!